So I feel very fortunate to be here. It's been amazing so far. Thank you for inviting me. I'm also happy to be able to talk now so that I can actually relax and enjoy the rest of the day. As you heard, I come from Sweden. I grew up in northern Sweden, climate very much like here, a small place. And I sometimes say that I think I'm here because I grew up in a lab. We were four, two brothers and two sisters, two brothers. We didn't have a lot of space. But there was one room in our house always dedicated to electronics. The walls were filled with these little red boxes with diodes and capacitors and resistors. And if you wanted to hang out with my dad, that's where you should be, soldering stuff, programming. So that's what I would do. It kind of really ignited something in me the first time I got to solder together when I was 11 years old, optical sensors with my cassette deck player. So that anybody who tried to come into my room could hear my voice say, "Get out of here." I love that. As you can imagine, I didn't have a lot of friends. And then a couple of years later, I discovered the wonderful world of connected computers and completely fell in love. Since then, I founded a couple of companies, advised a few startups, some of them successful, some of them less successful. And I'm also very honored to right now be a member of the Swedish Prime Minister's Innovation Council. And doing all of this, I still find myself amazed that there are, I don't think in this room, but out there, smart, experienced people who still sincerely and really misunderstand and underestimate what's going on right now. They underestimate what digital is all about. And I mean, we've seen that before. This guy, for instance, renowned national economist, said in the year 2000, though, the growth of the internet will slow drastically when it becomes apparent that most people have nothing to say to each other. All these kittens out there. By 2005 or so, it will become clear that the internet's impact on the economy has been no greater than the fax machine. 8 years after saying this, he actually got the Nobel Prize in Economy from Sweden. But what he didn't understand, and some people sometimes fail to understand, is that the internet is a communications revolution of the magnitude of the other communications revolutions which have been. We as a species learned how to speak. When we did that, we were able to communicate and store information and knowledge in each other's heads and thereby solve more complex problems than other species. The next communication revolution was when we learned how to write this down and take our knowledge and thereby transfer it to more people across time and space, our 3 dimensions. And that, some scientists today say, was the very foundation, what started us thinking in what we now call logic thinking. And then the next communication revolution again, that we all study in school, was learning how to print this, how to mass produce this, so that it could travel even further, reach even more people, and even faster. And that was the foundation of our modern society. That made public school make sense. That was, something. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had industrialization, etc. And that is what the internet is. It's a communications revolution that allows us to communicate, to share knowledge, to reach each other, to collaborate across the planet with the speed of lightning, anywhere, anytime. And that has a huge impact on human society. That is why I would say that digital is not, as too many people think right now, an industry. Digital is a new dimension that we as humans have. We always had time and space, and now we have time and space and digital as something relevant everywhere. All the places, every time that we want to collaborate with each other, every space we are in, every open space, every street, every house, every wall, everything, every piece of clothing, every table is starting to get this digital dimension that's relevant. And this is changing how we produce things, how we distribute them, how we market them, what we actually consume, but it's also changing things like what we trust or what we expect and how we behave. How many of you, I think some of you are as old as I am, remember back in 1995, when the web sort of got this big, most people started surfing. How many of you were there? Yeah. Do you remember how happy we were for so little? Yay! They also have a website. They can check out the opening hours. That's so amazing. And then a couple of years later, we got these smartphones, and we were connected 24/7, and suddenly we were not impressed with that little. We expected to have pretty much anything available at any time, 24/7. And a lot of existing companies are still sort of struggling to catch up with those expectations, right? But our expectations are not stopping there. They are continuing. And I see that I have a bit of a font problem here, but our expectations are now even on getting something I would call zero friction experiences. And I'll give you a few examples of what I think that is. That would be when Amazon launched the one-click-to-buy button, would have been like a significant start of our zero-friction expectations. And now we see, for instance, all social platforms are just launching these buy buttons, making it possible for us, the consumer, to instantly react on something that we want, buying it with just one click. Even YouTube is now launching their TrueView format with this type of buying experience. Now, this is not only blurring completely the lines between marketing and purchase. We know that something happens when we radically lower barriers for commerce or purchase. So what happened when we got the ATM machines was that before ATM machines, people would go to the bank about once a week and take out the money that they thought they would need and then spend it accordingly that week. They were actually planning ahead. Now, those of you who don't remember times before ATM machines, that might sound weird, but when my grandmother passed away, I saw that was actually still true for her. She behaved in that way, not so much. When the credit cards came and we all started using them, the same thing happened. We started making more instant decisions, meaning we started buying more often. So consumption went up. But all this we see will increase how often we buy and will change when we buy, but it also increases noise, which in turn increases our expectations of this to be kind of efficient. So we want this extreme personalization. We want things to take into account what we want to do, when we want to do it, where we are when we do it, who we are, what our behavior and interests and preferences usually are. We will even adjust it just now to how we are feeling at this very moment. It's quite interesting to notice that, we know that wearing something that tracks your biodata in real time, how stressed is Darja right now, based on the sweat on my fingers or the heartbeat, is no longer a geek thing. It's like Christmas present of the year last year in Sweden. So it's perfectly natural to be generating all this data and for it to be used somehow. And then we see that Apple already has a patent using information about light, weather conditions, humidity with this biodata. And then using also my facial expression, because there's a camera aimed at my face when I'm looking at my phone, my iPad, my computer, establishing what emotional state I am in and then addressing me with advertisement based on that. So I'm wondering, when I see pictures of my ex with somebody else, what kind of advertisement will I get? Chocolate? Ropes? Somebody once suggested baseball bats? It will be interesting, but we know that this will not only be used for commerce, it will we have the ideas, we know that we can do it, use it to radically improve quality and efficiency of things like education and healthcare. So a scientist just told me that, it's not that unlikely that quite soon when you brush your teeth, your saliva will automatically be sampled, and the results of that analysis will be uploaded to the cloud, cross-referenced with your DNA profile and your latest behavioral data to see if your meds are actually working. And if not, you'll automatically get a prescription for something else alongside with a personally adjusted, healthy exercise regimen to go with that. Now I'm thinking that many of you will say, look, I'm in the tech scene as much as you. But seriously, have you not at least seen one of these films? Should we not be talking about where we can end up? Can you spell to the word integrity? I think I can. But there are two things that I reflect on that. For one, this is already happening. This is not something that we can be smart, relaxing, sit back and say, do we want this? I'm not so sure. There is enormous potential for making things better, both in efficiency and quality, and humanity will use it. So we need to be active in actively shaping it, which is why I'm happy to talk to a crowd of startup entrepreneurs. The second thing is that concepts such as integrity are cultural concepts. My great-grandfather was not allowed to walk from the village where he lived to the neighboring village without having a signed paper in his hand from the priest. Because if he would do that deliberately on his own, he would be put in jail for being a hobo. That was not an infringement on his personal integrity at that time. Today in Sweden, we have these personal security numbers for everybody, which any Swede, I think you have it in Iceland too. So anybody here would think that's kind of the foundation of any efficient, rational welfare state, right? In Germany, for obvious historical reasons, that's completely illegal. So I would say that what we need right now is people being active so that we can get a democratic, fair, and safe exploration of what is a functional concept of integrity in a world that has a digital dimension. How should it work? When doing so, we also have a couple of other things that are interesting that we need to think about. Automation, for instance. There are now already more robots than humans working in Amazon's warehouses, which, when I read about the conditions in the warehouses, kind of seems like a good thing. But we also see robots being employed as guards, as servants in all kinds of contexts. And alongside that, we also see how artificial intelligence is really gaining ground. Even in a small country like Sweden, it's already replacing journalists writing weather news, sports referrals, and stuff like that. And we know, for instance, in the US, that we are using this type of technology to shorten cycles in clinical studies, to improve diagnostic when the machines work alongside doctors. Because, as a Swedish doctor just said, if you are the common doctor, you have 4,000 diagnoses to keep track of. If you would spend 100% of your time trying to keep track of research in all these, you would still only be able to keep track of 5%. 100% of your working hours trying to keep up does not work. That's why we need it. But the results of these trends are also kind of a challenge then. Fraser and Osborne were these researchers in the US who calculated that 47% of all jobs in the US could be automized within the next 2 decades. In Sweden, when they transferred it, it was even 53%, where 450,000 jobs are expected to disappear in the next 5 years. Now, does that mean that we don't have jobs anymore? No. Does it mean that innovators and entrepreneurs are more important? Yes. Because what we know is that when we run with machines and we need to compete here, what is important is using the traits that we are not that good at putting in machines yet. Our social skills, our creativity, to name 2 out of 3. So basically, knowledge today is for free, and the most important competitive advantage we have is innovation capability. How fast can we move, and with what accuracy in coming up with new solutions that we really need? And when we do that, I would like to add one thing. I think that it's important also that we learn to look for areas where demand is growing faster than automation is speeding up. And here's an area that I think that we are currently underestimating because it is so new to us, is digital consumption in itself. How many of you have LinkedIn Pro accounts? A bunch. You pay a lot of money for that. Now, 10 years ago, if we would have said, look, would you want to pay this much money to have your CV online so that you can see who's watching your CV and connect to people? Most people would have gone like, come again? No. We tend to see a lot of the digital consumption as just gaming, listening to music, watching films. What we're not really addressing clearly enough is that we have only started scraping the surface of what we as humans can invent in terms of digital consumption. And the other thing that is kind of interesting is, I think that's a source of endless growth, because who knows how much we can create. In the UK, they seem to have gotten this a little bit. There's a very interesting institution called Nesta, who, for instance, said they believe that they can create 1 million new jobs in the UK only within this kind of creative work. And it's also important because what we see is that the stuff that we can innovate that, for instance, will turn products into services where we have the product but we use it longer and more efficiently can help save the world. We know that we can create better and more efficient healthcare, better and more efficient transportation solutions, better and more efficient energy solutions, etc. And I'm hoping that many of you are actually aiming your effort at coming up with these innovations, because that's what we really need. But one thing that they all have in common, all of these really great ideas aiming at these challenges, is that they're built on data. So we also need to change our mindset and understand that infrastructure is no longer only cables in the ground. Information in itself is the renewable resource that we build these innovations on, and therefore information is infrastructure. Many of the solutions we need to build need to go cross-sector, and right now, too much of this very valuable material is locked down underground in horrible databases owned and not shared. So we should be looking at how do we create incentives for both the public sector and the private sector to share in a structured way as much as possible of this valuable stuff that we can invent on. And then addressing that from like an Iceland and Sweden perspective, unlike our friends across the Atlantic, we have this reality to think about. So I think in Iceland you're probably more aware of this, that from a global perspective you're a village. Perhaps the coolest village in the entire world, but still a village. In Sweden people are not as painfully aware that with 9 million people, slightly less than inhabitants of Manhattan, we're just a city. So being that small, we cannot look at our nation as, there is no such thing, I think, as internal competition then. We need to pool our resources and make sure that we get all this valuable stuff up there as much and as richly as possible. And I would love to see a Nordic collaboration on this type of thing. Because if we do that, and at the same time look at how can we shape our societies and incentives to have this mental model and decide that today we live in a world with a new dimension. We have the world of atoms and we have the world of bits. Let's try to innovate as much as we can of using the digital dimension on increasing the value of every single atom on the planet. Let us make sure that we use it more scarcely, that we consume it more efficiently, and preferably that every single table, car, and whatnot has this digital service that I will pay for again and again and again and again, creating wealth. And then secondly, that we never, ever underestimate the potential endless growth we can create in digital consumption. Because I think if we agree to do that, if we agree to take those steps, we will be creating sustainable growth for the world, and that's exactly what we need. Thank you very much.